You had to have a headache by the end of that. Okay. Looks like it's 10:01, so I think we're going to get started. Good morning to everyone. Welcome to the Meet the WorkZone Data Exchange Project webinar, How to Get Better WorkZone Data Out to the Traveler. My name is Joanna Rigo. I'm from KMJ, and on behalf of the Eastern Transportation Coalition, we'd like to welcome you all. We are just going to go through a couple quick housekeeping items, and then we'll get started. We are using Zoom webinar. You can use your audio through either your computer or your phone. This web meeting is being recorded. If you have any questions with audio or the web, you can reach out to Esther. Her email address is on the screen. For this webinar, the chat box will not be available to participants. We're going to have you use the Q&A box for your questions to the presenters. So basically, you go down to where you see the Q&A, you tap that, and you enter your question. The questions will be monitored throughout the entire meeting, and at the appropriate times after presentations, we'll stop and take questions, and we'll also do so at the end, depending on our time. If you'd like to ask a question verbally, you're also able to do that. You just raise your hand, and then we will call on you, and we will you can ask your question. Some questions are, in fact, easier to ask verbally. When you're finished, we just ask that you mute your line. At this point, and just one other thing, the second part of this meeting is a roundtable, so we're going to give a little bit more instruction to those folks from our member agencies who are participating in that roundtable. We'll give a little bit more information about how that's going to run when we get closer to that portion of the meeting. But at this point, I want to turn it over to Denise Marco, who is the TSMO Program Director for the Eastern Transportation Coalition. Denise?
Thank you, Joanna. Thanks everyone for joining. I know that we appreciate your time, and hopefully this will be a great learning experience for all of you. We've got the folks from the WorkZone Data Exchange Project here. I'm going to turn this over to our co-chair, Kelly and Mary, in just a second, but I wanted to walk through a couple things we're doing at the coalition first. Next slide, Joanna, if I could. So I guess to say we're really busy would be I don't know what you'd call it, an understatement. Recently we've had, these are some of the meetings we've had over the course of the summer. We have a Waze technical meeting every 6 months where we work with the Waze product team and some of the Waze data folks. So we're looking on integration with them to better improve their app. We have a biannual meeting with our state reps who work in our in the states that purchase data from our marketplace. So we did that in June. We have our quarterly RIDIS user group meetings. If those of you are interested in learning how the RIDIS platform works and how the agencies use it, showcasing those happen quarterly. We just had a webinar back on August 19th called the ABCs of Conflation, where we was more of our first step into a real technical webinar, talk about mapping. And we had about 163 people on that. So that was a kind of a nice step forward for us in that regard. And we have our knee deep in our evaluation of our RFP as we build a new marketplace that has 6 different types of data sets. We have about 54 of our members that are involved in the evaluation teams in some manner, shape, or form. We had meeting 1 yesterday, meeting 2 and 3 coming up in September and October. So a lot going on. Hopefully we're targeting December 1st to have an award for this marketplace RFP. Upcoming again, as I mentioned, our October meeting to finish off our ratings and scorings for the evaluation, RFP evaluation. Our quarterly RIDIS user is coming up in September. The TravInfo mapping technical meeting, what that is that's a member invite technical meeting where we're looking to do a gap analysis in terms of how mapping companies send out traveler information and what are some of the data fields that might be missing. We're going to look at Uber, Lyft, Apple, Google, et cetera, and provide a technical memo to them. So that meeting is an invite meeting. If you are interested in that, let me know. We are looking for GIS people, data people, as well as the TravInfo folks for that. We have a national webinar coming up in November on TDADS. What that is that's the project that's building the congestion pie chart for the states. We have about 28 states already loaded into the tool, but that webinar will be showcasing how each of the states can go in and get access to their congestion from a statewide perspective, as well as a county perspective, and moving forward, how we're going to be moving into corridors. So that's on November 10th. And then again, the biannual group of the Waze and the marketplace. So as I mentioned, a lot going on. You want more information, let me know. And off we go. Next slide, please. So from here on out, I'm going to push this over to Mary Amin and Kelly Wells, two of our co-chairs for the TravInfo group. Amazing people. Thank you so much for doing what you do. And off I go. I'm on mute and take it away.
Okay, I think I'm up next. So it's good morning, everyone. It's my honor to co-chair this committee and also today to walk you through the agenda and then introduce our very talented and esteemed speakers. So today's agenda is after those introductions, there will be our three primary speakers. Stan Young will give a little background on the road data user project, and then making it work, standardizing road construction data sharing with the Work Zone Data Exchange will be David Craig, who's the Chief of Maps at General Motors, and Nate Deshmukh Towery, who's a policy analyst with the USDOT Volpe Center. Then we'll switch to the state agency roundtable discussion, which Joanna had mentioned earlier. And then there'll be a wrap up and remaining questions. So with that, I think we'll move to the next slide. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is such a growing area of interest. We've got 136 people registered, representing 26 states, as well as DOTs, turnpike authorities, MPOs, consultants, vendors, universities, and other federal agencies. It's well beyond the eastern states, so we can see that we're onto something here, and I think that the Eastern Transportation Coalition is really doing a huge service, not just to this big region, but also to the country by focusing their work on these types of events and on these types of topics. So I think with that, I want to thank everyone for coming. It's now my pleasure to introduce our three main speakers, and after which I will turn things over to Stan, and then we will then Kelly will pick up. But first of all, let me go ahead and introduce our three speakers. First is Stan Young. He's the Advanced Transportation and Urban Scientist and Chief Data Officer for the Eastern Transportation Coalition. He recently rejoined the coalition's team as the Chief Data Officer. Stan provides technical leadership to the Traffic Data Marketplace project, as well as other new data-driven projects for the coalition. He is also the Mobility Systems Team Lead for the National Renewable Energy Laboratories Center for Integrated Mobility Science. He serves as the DOE technologist for the City of Columbus Smart City Program, and he also serves as the principal investigator and advisor to several projects at the intersection of mobility and energy. So welcome, Stan, or should I say welcome back, Stan. Our next speaker will be Nate Deshmukh Towery, who's a technology policy analyst at the U.S. Department of Transportation's Volpe Transportation Systems Center. He's the USDOT lead for the Work Zone Data Exchange project on behalf of the ITS Joint Program Office. This project aims to make travel on public roads safer and more efficient through ubiquitous access to data on work zone activity. In his other work at Volpe, he works to boost early stage transportation technologies out of the lab and into the field with FHWA's Exploratory Advanced Research Program. This funds longer term, higher risk research projects that could lead to transformational changes and truly revolutionary advances in highway engineering and intermodal surface transportation in the United States. Thank you, Nate, for being with us today too, and for your contributions. And our third speaker is David Craig, Chief of Maps at General Motors. In 1992, fresh out of college, Dave Craig was hired as an RF engineer into the fast-paced world of consumer electronics to work in the new arena of GPS technology, to design GPS receivers, localization products, and eventually mapping products. And for the past 25 plus years, this has been a recurring focus of his engineering career, as he has helped develop over 200 GPS mapping products. In 2016, Dave joined GM as its Chief of Maps, where he's responsible for the strategy and execution of GM's automated driving maps, which are a critical core component of the modern automated driving vehicle. This includes content, data structure, creation, storage, electronic horizon, data providers, usage of map content, mapping localization, map transportation to and from vehicle, and map maintenance. So I guess when we use our eyesight and other amendments to our driver capabilities, we look at our Google Maps and or generic maps, we can thank David for that. So with that, I'm gonna go off screen, and I'm going to turn the proceedings over to Stan Young. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Mary. Welcome, everyone. We're glad to host this as the Eastern Transportation Coalition. I'm the warm-up act to the main feature here with our speakers from Volpe and from GM. I just want to add a little context and keep it short, but really encouraged by the turnout and really encouraged that we're discussing this today. Let's move on to the next slide here. To give a perspective, I use these 4 slides in a lot of areas to set kind of the context of the conversations that the coalition is hosting, evoking, and wants to take people through. I use this, it's the best of times. It used to be when we got together, it was quite a closed group. We were talking to ourselves among the DOTs. Now it's a much more broader group. We got digital mapping companies, we got traffic information through industry, more and better info for the DOTs and travelers to use than we've ever had before. A very, very rich environment. Glad to be in it. Next slide. It is, well, it's not the worst of times, but it is challenging times. With more players in the room, the challenges has shifted not from collecting data, but from coordinating and communicating data. This flow chart that I have here, I'm not going to talk through. It's a flow chart that came out of a pooled fund study, and it shows how for a state DOT to communicate base mapping changes to one particular mapping vendor, and realize that every time you have a significant change on your network, in this case, you added a bypass or you added a new road improvement, but it may be a major incident, it may be a major weather event, it may be major construction. There is a custom process to go through to communicate to every one of these external contacts that we have. And we're quickly finding that this process is very hard to manage, very untenable at the present time. So that's kind of where we find ourselves today. But the good news is that there's some initiatives to address this. Let's go on to the next slide. We created this, and Denise contributed the picture of the kid drinking from the fire hose. So we're trying to catch up and get in front of this. Our mission is to build effective common data exchange formats and sources so that all mapping companies, and you can add their traffic data companies, navigation companies, have a one location or a standard location, a standard portal to pick up the needed information. Today's world, I thought this was a great picture, and I found out that somebody else had made it before me, but you have all the state DOTs on the left, or city DOTs or county DOTs, and you have all your electronic vendors on the right, mapping companies, traffic information companies, various sorts of private entities. And we're kind of in this world where we've been in an ad hoc, every DOT has to communicate individually to every one of these vendors, and it spans things like conflation, map bases, road classes, incident definitions, custom APIs. There's lack of standards, and you know, every time we have a new vendor, we got to repeat it. So we said the complexity just goes up by the number of vendors and the amount of data. So we're trying to find a way to get this world organized, and that leads us to one of the significant initiatives that we have today. The next slide is a picture of what we hope to evolve to, a much more organized way of going about business. All the DOTs on the left talk and communicate their information as well as draw information through a set of standard interfaces. In the mapping world, we call this our Rosetta Stone initiative. How do we communicate base mapping changes both in and out from every state DOT to every mapping company? What we're going to talk about today, and what I think is the premier initiative coming from the federal government, is Work Zone Data Exchange, or WZDx. Not only is that standard maturing and being deployed, but that process of creating that data exchange standard, from my observation, has really turned on the expectations, turned on the momentum, saying, hey, we not only need work zone data exchanges, we need incident data exchanges, we needed posted bridge data exchanges, and so forth and so on. We need to get into the habit of any business process out there has a standardized method of communicating to multiple entities, both inside the DOT world and outside to these multiple vendors. And as these vendors come online, they can drink from a preset way of accessing this data and passing it back and forth. And this way, the complexity is managed. It's only the number of defined data interfaces. With that, we're going to bridge over to our main acts today, particularly with WZDx. You're going to get an education of where that process is at, and hopefully the speakers will speak towards where they want to see the process of WZDx applied to other data interfaces that are of great need in our society today. So with that, I will turn it over back to Joanna. We have a poll for you, and then we'll get into our main speakers.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, folks, so we're going to have a series of polls during our meeting today to keep you engaged and to just make sure we understand kind of the pulse of our attendees. So you have a question with 3 choices. How familiar are you with the Work Zone Data Exchange? Very familiar, somewhat familiar, or not familiar? So go ahead and chime in your vote. I don't know, maybe 5 more seconds, Joanna?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, let's see what they said.
We're going to share.
Can everyone see that? Okay, so it seems like there's actually a nice even divide at the bottom. So we have an equal mix between somewhat familiar and not familiar, which is another great reason that we had this webinar today. So just a small percentage of people are very familiar. So I think Nate and David, that really gives you some context about how to approach this topic with our viewers. So thank you all for your input. And with that, I think, are we ready to just turn it over to David and Nate, Joanna?
Yep, we're ready to go.
Okay, well, take it away, gentlemen.
Awesome, thank you. You can go to the next slide, and then you can go one more slide ahead. So Dave and I work on the Work Zone Data Exchange project along with a whole bunch of folks who are already on this call, probably those who said they were very familiar, and a whole bunch of organizations. We're over 100 organizations strong who are committed to the WZDx, the Work Zone Data Exchange. For those of you who are and aren't familiar, I wanted to kind of drill down to the very basic place that WZDx is. It is a simple open standard for sharing data about planned and active or real-time work zone events. There's a whole bunch of other stuff too. We're interested in tracking workers who are working in work zones to make their work safer. We're interested in other types of data that are related to but aren't work zones, but at the heart of WZDx, this is what it is. It is a simple, open way to share data about planned and active work zones. Next slide, please. So where did WZDx come from? right? This need has obviously been here for a while. And the catalyst was probably 3 or 4 years ago when the U.S. Department of Transportation reached out to the automated vehicle community and said, we think we hear you need data about, events that are happening on the infrastructure, and you would like to have that data from the owners of that infrastructure directly, rather than data that you derive from, computer vision or other sources. Is that true? And we heard kind of a pretty resounding yes, and a pretty resounding, push that work zones were kind of a main impediment and a good place to start to build the specification or a standard way of exchanging that data, either with fleets or directly with vehicles themselves. There's obviously the human drivers that go through work zones that need this information too, but we at the time were very invested in kind of engaging the AV community, and so that's kind of where we started with this. And we looked around and said, do we want to build a standard in the traditional systems engineering way, or do we want to try a different approach? And is there a way to do it in the open, in a streamlined way that happens really quickly, and kind of gives us a way to iteratively build over time from kind of the baseline set of data that's available now, which it turns out is some, but not a lot, right? And so we looked around, and that's why you have transit data up here, because I know most of you don't do transit. But the general transit feed specification is a great model for this open iterative development of exchanging schedule information, and now kind of it is used all around the world to do more than schedules, but that at its base was kind of a good place to start. So we started here, and we modeled WZDx on the general transit feed specification, which is a streamlined way to do that. Next slide, please. This is kind of our splash screen. The notion that if you keep it simple, you keep it open, it's easier for folks to adopt. It doesn't have to be overly complex. And with broader adoption, we can get this data into vehicles, both human and driving and automated driving vehicles, and save lives. Next slide, please. So why are we here today, right? We think there's a pretty great alignment with Eastern Transportation Coalition missions, connecting public agencies across modes to increase safety, and managing incidents. So work zones are just obviously one way that highways and roadways are impacted, that impact travel across state lines. You do open development and information exchange, and we're very focused on keeping things open, keeping the community as engaged as possible. This is not something that USDOT is doing. This is something where USDOT is a partner with everyone else involved, and the community drives the development of WZDx and related specifications. And we like to think that we're all at the forefront of innovation in transportation, especially when it comes to safe integration of connected and automated vehicles. Next slide. All right, and this is where I turn it over to my co-chair, Dave Craig. And he's going to dive you a little bit more deeply into the specification itself. So those of you who are familiar with this should seem relatively familiar, but we wanted to make sure that we kind of gave you a flavor of what it actually is and what we're actually exchanging in WZDx. So Dave?
Thanks, Nate. So I'm very excited by the fact that approximately 60% have already heard of WZDx at least a little bit. So that's exciting. That means we're doing at least part of our job well and getting the word out. So for the other 40%, I'm going to dive just slightly into the WZDx structure so that you can at least walk away with a base understanding of how it works. Obviously, in 5 minutes, I can't really go into great detail on a standard, but I do want to touch on it at least at a high level. So starting off, the WZDx organization is a object model specification, which is great because that means we're utilizing GeoJSON format. So every single feed is a valid GeoJSON file. It includes JSON schema, which has a single source of truth. And because of this, if you pick up a WZDx feed, it's human readable. It's comma indented with brackets, and you can pick it up and actually drill right down to human readable understanding of what's going on inside the work zone. So that's exciting, and that makes it very nice for data producers and data consumers to be able to just understand what's happening and not just rely on a computer somewhere parsing the elements out correctly. So we're going to dig into this just slightly, and every single WZDx feed is kind of broken into two parts. We have the RoadEventFeedinfo, and that includes all information about the data sources and the data providers. And I'm going to drill into these a little deeper. And then we have the RoadEventFeature, which is the GeoJSON encoding, which talks exactly about what's going on inside the road event, and the GeoJSON geometry, which is line, string, or multi-point. So the RoadEventFeature has a relationship model, which also includes a type of work, and we even have optional lane information with lane restrictions. So next slide, please. So backing up just a little bit, the WZDxFeed object, this is the root, the highest level of the WZDX feed. There's one WZDxFeed object per WZDX GeoJSON document. The WZDxFeed is an instance of a GeoJSON feature collection object. Okay, so really fancy words saying the RoadEventFeedinfo, the type and features are properties. And if you look at the WZDX feed and the GeoJSON, we have the RoadEventFeedinfo and the RoadEventFeed feature, just like I was talking about a minute ago. We have two different branches here. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the RoadEventFeedinfo. So like I said before, this basically describes the header information such as metadata, the version, the contact information, the data sources. There's one RoadEventFeedinfo per WZDX GeoJSON document. This is all about who's building the WZDX event here. This is about the publisher, the version, the data sources, the update date. When was it last updated? The update frequency. How often is it updated? Who's the contact name? Who's the contact email? This is all about the data provider. So this is where did the data come from? Okay, next slide, please. And once again, talking about the RoadEvent sources, the RoadEvent DataSource Object describes information about a specific data source used to build the WZDX feed. The WZDX feed must contain at least one RoadEvent data source. In other words, we have to know who created this information. The RoadEvent data source is included as an entry in the data source arrays of the RoadEvent feed object. So properties of this, what does this contain? It contains the source ID, the organization name, the location method, meaning how did you get the lat long where this started? Did you use a GPS or did you just read it off a map? The update date, the update frequency, the contact name, the contact email, the location verification method. In other words, did someone go out there with a precise GPS and actually know down to the centimeter what this location is? The IRS type and LRS type and LRS URL. So this is the RoadEvent data source. So next slide, please. And now let's talk about what's actually in it. So this is the good part. This is the meat. The container object for a WZDx RoadEvent, it's an instance of a GeoJSON feature. As such, the properties are, it's a type, it has properties, and it has geometry. So this is the RoadEvent feature we're talking about. In other words, what's actually happening on the road. So next slide, please. So the RoadEvent objects are the primary WZDX object. This is what it's all about. This contains information that describes where, when, what activity is taking place along a road segment. The specification currently accommodates work zone and detour type road events. So in other words, you can, if you want to include the detour, you can do that. Specified by the road event types property. I should also point out at this particular point that there's a lot of optional fields that come with the WZDX. If you don't have the detour, you don't have to include it. It's an optional. You can include it if you have it. So the properties. So what all is included here? We have the road event ID, the event type, the data source ID, start date, end date, start date accuracy, end date accuracy. In other words, are we guessing or do we actually know what day this will start? The beginning accuracy, the ending accuracy, the road name, direction, the vehicle impact, the relationship, the lanes, road number, beginning cross street, ending cross street. Once again, a lot of these are optional. Just put in what data you have. Beginning milepost, ending milepost. Sorry, I wasn't quite done with that one. Total number of lanes, type of works, workers present, reduced speed, and workers present. We have a whole subcommittee working on that, so that one's still being built out. Reduced speed limit, restrictions, description, creation date, and the update date. Like I said, and I can't stress this enough, most of these are optional. Put in what data you have. But if you don't have all this data, we still want to know what data you do have. Every single piece of data is informative and relevant and good information. Next slide, please. All right, so Nate, I think this comes back to you now.
Yep, this comes to me. And yeah, thanks, Dave. So the Works on Data Exchange specification is housed under an organization called the Works on Data Working Group. And the purpose of this group is really to maintain the specification itself and its multiple iterations, to kind of encourage the community to be built around it, to support open development and best practices for creating, you can read it, consuming, mapping, publishing, and analyzing works on event data and WZDx. This is where the magic happens, as it were. WZDx is on GitHub, which is a way that we iterate the specification itself over time. But there's also a wiki site attached to the specification itself. And it is where we share community notes for all the meetings, links to everything. It's kind of where you can find anything you want to know about what's going on. This is kind of how, when I say we develop in the open, you can find anything here. Again, if you want to join, we'll have a link at the end that would make that happen for you. But really, this is an open, community-driven effort, and it's open to everyone. Next slide, please. So there are 5 working groups. We call them subgroups because it's confusing to have working groups under working groups. There are 5 active groups that are working under the Works on Data Working Group. One is focused on the spec itself. Dave mentioned the second one, which is focused on worker presence, really trying to figure out what technology exists and how to get data off of the technology that exists to get information about real-time worker presence. A group focused on technical assistance and implementation, and a couple new groups that just started about 6 months ago. One is focused on building out smart work zone ITS to get kind of a companion real-time data feed up alongside a planned data feed. So figuring out how we get better real-time data from smart work zone devices and integrating that into and alongside WZDx. And then the last group, which I'll talk a little bit about later, is looking at ways that we can extend WZDx, as Dan mentioned, to road events other than work zones. Next slide, please. All available WZDx data feeds, currently there are 4. There are a bunch more in process, are published and hosted by roadway owners. There is no common data lake that all the data goes in, and no common database that everyone can pull directly from. And so there's a registry or a clearinghouse, however you want to think of it, where if you're interested in finding which data feeds are available and where to find them, you go here, and all of them are in one place, and links to them and contact information and kind of very basic information about that, about active data feeds are there. The link to that is down at the bottom. Encourage you to go and play around in there and take a look. Next slide, please. All right, I think this is still me. So I mentioned there are 4 active feeds. You can see them on the screen here. There are the 3 sort of grayish ones, and then Texas at the bottom. There are active grants that the USDOT made earlier this year to set up or extend 13 organizations were awarded them. You can see those in blue and or gray. So by the end of, by next summer, I would say, we'll have at least 20 active data feeds, and hopefully I see a bunch of your member states are not colored in, and we hope that over the next year we can help you get set up with data feeds as well, so that this map is a little more shaded in. Next slide, please. Okay, so WZDx is intended to be kind of at its base usable in all sorts of different ways. If you can get very basic information about where work zones are, you can use it for basically a wide variety of things, rather than we can start with a specific use case. But I did want to walk you through how some folks have used it in the past and are using it, just so you can get a sense of how it might be useful. One is to notify truck operators of upcoming work zones. This was piloted in Arizona by Maricopa County, along with DriveWise, which is a pre-clearance provider, usually for commercial motor vehicles. Piping information and using WZDx directly into the in-cab devices about upcoming work zones, and showing time to queue as well as detour around that. And they'll be expanding the scope of the WZDx data they provide in Maricopa County and Arizona DOT with their demonstration grant this year and next year. Next slide, please.
I think we're back to me, Nate.
You got it.
All right, so the question is, why am I involved? Why does GM care about this? And one of the things that GM has as an initiative is something we call our 000 plan, our 000 initiative. That stands for zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. So when we talk about that, obviously automated driving plays a big role into those zeros, leading to helping get to zero crashes and zero congestion. So with that being the case, GM is very focused on automated driving, and our first adventure into the automated driving realm was GM Super Cruise. There's a little bit of marketing stuff here about how GM Super Cruise was one of the world's first hands-free driving system. There's a link here that if you want to watch some cool actors experience it, you can do that. But I'm really focused on that bottom right piece. Super Cruise and all of GM's automated driving systems are utilizing a LiDAR mapping technology where we go out and LiDAR scan the roads to insanely high accuracy, and we produce these maps that we consume with Super Cruise that are accurate in the 10 to 15 centimeter range in absolute coordinates. So as such, because Super Cruise relies on these very hyper accurate HD maps that we call them in the industry, high definition maps, we have to make sure that these maps are maintained and updated as soon as the roads change. So tracking construction zones becomes a primary focus of a lot of our work. We have a whole team that's set up to contact the various state entities on a weekly basis, tracking different construction zones, trying to make sure that we understand, are they architecturally changing? Are they not architecturally changing? When do they start? When do they stop? When can we get our car back out there and re-LiDAR scan it? So this is a very key element of my real life day job description. So I'm very involved in this. So any method that would standardize how construction zones are reported and create central clearinghouses that I can go subscribe to and have APIs to pull this information down automatically, that's very interesting to me from 2 points of view. Number one, from the map point of view, to keep my maps fresh, updated, and current. And number two, as we venture into the WZDx world, I could actually start to get real-time information about the construction zones into the cars and actually understand what's happening real-time, so that even if my map is wrong, maybe I could get enough information to correct it on the fly via a WZDx feed in the construction zone. So this is very near and dear to my actual day job at GM. This is very important to General Motors, and we obviously General Motors allows me to support this and be a very active member in this community. So I'm very much excited about this. I'm very excited to help talk about this, and as a customer of the WZDx, or better, a consumer of the WZDx events, hopefully in the future when this becomes ubiquitous and all the DOTs are using it, I think this is going to be a very powerful tool and really help reduce crashes, improve safety, reduce deaths and accidents in construction zones. So that's why we're involved. That's what GM is trying to get out of this, that we were really trying to march toward the zero accidents, the zero death concept. So that's why I'm here. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. So next slide, please. And I think, Nate, we're back to you.
Awesome. We only have a couple more before we turn it over to you all, and I'm looking forward to hearing from you. So I wanted to briefly mention this Workzone data collection toolset, which is an open source software tool that was developed with federal highway funding. And if you wanted to pilot WZDx in one or more locations in your jurisdiction, you can use this tool. It's basically, you either have a GPS-enabled laptop running the software or an Android device. You drive through a work zone and it generates a WZDx feed of that work zone based on the configuration, some very basic configuration information you provided up front, as well as as you drive through, which lanes are open and which lanes are closed. It's being tested in a variety of locations. And there, I can send you a link to the GitHub site where you can access it if you'd like. Next slide, please. All right. mentioned that I would talk a little bit more about the specification extension work, which has kind of been an ongoing, I wouldn't say conflict, but place to kind of figure out how do we make WZDx a model that works for other types of data and other use cases. When we were first starting, so WZDx is going into version 4, right? We started with version 1 and we kind of had 3 iterations where we've slowly added new data elements, both optional and made some required, and made it more useful without trying to make it too complex. And we've had this tension of how do we bring in data elements that aren't work zones, but are really valuable for sharing about roadway configurations and activities without breaking the focus on work zones. And so the specification extension group is starting to figure out ways to do that, trying to figure out how to adopt WZDx's focus on data modeling best practices and address adjacent problems on this. They're starting with low clearances for bridge heights, but there are obviously a wide variety of other types of roadway data that could be exchanged in a similar way. And this is the place that we're kind of playing with that and exploring how to do that. So if you're interested in that, we encourage you to get involved in this group because they are moving fast and trying not to break anything, and they would love your help. Next slide, please. All right, and this is it for us. So we'd love to have you involved if you're not already. The Work Zone Data Working Group meets twice a year. Our next meeting will be in early September. We review kind of what the 5 different subgroups have been up to, what they've achieved over the last 6 months, and kind of lay the groundwork for the next 6 months. You can email me. I'm avdx@dot.gov, and I will add you to that mailing list. And if you're interested in participating in any of the 5 subgroups, let me know, and I'm happy to connect you with their leadership as well. And we also encourage you to go on the GitHub site and get familiar with WZDx. There's lots of example feeds, example configuration scenarios to kind of figure out how you can make WZDx work for how your agency does work zones, and submit issues if you want to add things to the spec or share your knowledge with the community. So thank you so much. We look forward.
Nate, I would also add that Daryl dropped the GitHub link into the chat, so you can get access to that there.
So he dropped it into our private chat.
Sorry, I thought he dropped it into the actual chat.
Yeah. So we will perhaps, if someone opens a question, we will provide that link in the answer as well as in the follow-up.
Yep.
So Kelly, over to you.
Okay, very good. Thank you, gentlemen. That was wonderful. That was exactly what I was hoping you would do. Get into some of the guts and the meat, because you hear, oh, there's this standard. And I'm like, I want more. Tell me more. But I've been to the meetings and they're really detailed. So I needed kind of that bridge. So this was fantastic. I hope the rest of you who are somewhat familiar got a lot out of this. We've had great questions in the chat. Please go back if you asked a question and see the answers. But I wonder if anyone else had a question for David and Nate.
Nate, you can answer that verbally if you'd like from chat.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to type an answer to Chester's question, which was, is there a way to note changes to lane width or height for oversized and overweight permitting? And the answer is yes. You can, if you have information only about a roadway and not at the lane level, you can enter that. And if you have lane level restrictions, you can go down to the individual lane basis, and there's a set of restrictions that are available for you to note at a lane level basis. So the answer is yes.
Very good. And I see Stan Young has his hand raised. Stan?
Yeah, I was going to ask a question on either QC, QA, or validity or security, whichever, having a history in this. You learn not to trust what's coming out of construction and maintenance systems because it's all subject to whoever has that responsibility, how much they keep it up to date. Is there some processes being built into, David, if you pick this up and put it in your Super Cruise, that you have some sense of the information you're getting from a certain state is accurate, valid, things like that?
Hey, Stan, this is Dave. Yeah, that's part of the validation field where you have to actually specify how it was validated. And then in the metadata, we actually track when it was last updated and the update frequency. If you remember, I kind of touched on those a little bit. So we can start to understand, is this event I'm looking at 6 months old or was it produced an hour ago? We start to be able to understand that. And then was it verified by precision GPS, or was it just someone reading data off a map? So both those elements, we start to be able to get a grasp on how accurate is the information and how fresh is the information.
Great, great answer. All right, last call. Any lingering questions? And you can certainly type them into the chat, and I know our presenters will be watching the chat. So any last questions? All right, well, I've gotten the prompt to move ahead. So let's do the polls. It takes a village, folks. You have no idea to make this all happen. All right, poll question number 2. Would you be interested in a deeper dive into the technical details of WZDx? So you see the 3 choices. Go ahead and make your vote, please. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead, Joanna, show us the results. Oh, resoundingly yes. So please, gentlemen, we welcome you back for a deeper dive. And I think today when you hear us talk about where we are with our states, it'll give you some context about what are the pieces and parts that we're really struggling with. So this was fantastic. We really appreciate you today. Thank you so much. All right, and we have one more poll question for our participants. Poll 3, is your agency planning or possibly actively specifying WZDx in future builds of your ATMS or your CMS? Go ahead and pop your answer there. It's like when I ask my kids a question they don't answer, I just start counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Go ahead, Joanna, show us the results. Okay. Okay, so again, see some folks, I just think there's so much, it's such a great concept, but from concept to details is a big span. So help us understand more so we can, answer these questions. So, all right, those are our polls for today. Thank you for folks that participated in those. And now I'm going to turn it over to Denise for the state agency roundtable discussion.
Thank you, Kelly. Kelly, you are amazing. What a great facilitator. It's always a pleasure to have you on our webinars because you really speak your mind and tell you how you feel. So it's awesome. For everybody that's on the phone, however, what we've done is we worked with the WZDx folks and came up with a set of questions that we'd like you to walk through for us in a roundtable. We will be collecting this. We will put it into a matrix. We'll provide it to the WZDx team as well as to yourselves to give you kind of an idea of who's at what point in the integration of work zone data with what they're providing to travel information. I'm going to call on each agency rep that I have kind of on my list. If it's not you and someone else is from that state, please chime in. When it's your turn, the line's going to be unmuted by our host, by Joanna, and your line will not be muted after your update. So please remember to mute your own line when you finish speaking. Next slide, please. So these are going to be the questions we are going to roundtable, but hopefully you have these prepared or look through them. The first question is, what is your current process for sharing planned work zone information? So 60 seconds, because this is like a rapid fire roundtable. Walk us through the scenario that you have. You're closing the left lane of the freeway tonight for planned repairs. How does your process for getting that information to drivers work today? Okay, these were sent out last week. Hopefully you have an answer for us. What systems do you currently use to manage road construction and associated data? Do you use a separate construction management system, which is the CMS, in addition to a traffic management system or a lane closure reporting system? We live in a world of acronyms, for those of you that aren't familiar with those. And if road construction activities tracked or reported through multiple systems, can you explain how the data integration and publication might take place? And the third question, if your state is divided into districts or DOT planning, ops, or policy, what's the common and what is common and what is variable about how each district generates and transmits information? You create like work zone data in different formats. You experience difficulties exchanging or sharing work zone data. Just know that a final word and thank you.
Can you hear me, Denise?
I can. Go ahead. Thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you, Denise, for bringing us all together today. And thank you to our speakers, Nate and David and Stan. We appreciate your wonderful input. Thank you to the roundtable participants. That was really fascinating. This is I guess you're a travel information geek when you just sit here and, you know, can't get enough of these conversations. So thank you all for that. As always, thank you to KMJ, who does a fantastic job facilitating these things. I don't think we say that enough, but KMJ, you all are excellent, and we appreciate your support for webinars like this. So again, thanks to everyone for participating today, and we will see you at our next event. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Kelly. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Mary.
Gerald and Joanna, could you stay on the line?